Let's see. Assalamualaikum. Can you all hear me?
Salam.
All right. We have a new addition to our class today. Hey Sun. Is that how you pronounce it? Can you show yourself? Hey. Hey Sun. Are you here? No, it's okay. I see his name, but he cannot communicate yet.
Yes, Prof. I'm
okay,
here.
All right, good.
Sorry, right now I'm just taking for other class, but Prof is still here, so I can't escape from here.
You have another class now?
Yes.
Where is your other class? Hello? Well, never mind. We have already 18 people now. The presenters ready?
Yes, sir.
All right. Let's see. Yeah, Vaiteswari, Tovia, and Nur Shafika are presenting today, right? Is your presentation ready, Vaiteswari?
Yes, doctor. Yes, it's ready, doctor.
Okay, if you're ready, can you start your presentation? Share the screen.
Okay. Doctor, it shows that the host disabled the participant to share screen.
Okay, multiple. Okay, all right. Okay.
Okay.
I've changed the.
Okay.
Can you share screen now?
Yes.
Possible?
Okay.
Good. All right, I can see the screen. Okay, we'll try to end our class today by 7:45, if that's okay with everyone. So unless there are objections, we'll try to end it by 7:45. Okay. All right then, Vaiteswari, Nur Shafika, and Kingsley.
Yes.
You prefer to be called as Tovia, Kingsley?
Yes, no problem.
All right, okay then. Shall we begin?
Yeah, sure.
All right, let's go.
Can I start?
Yes, please. Is your audio okay? Is it Kingsley presenting?
Not really. It's
I hear you, but we can't see the screen now.
Hello.
We see your face, but no screen
Uh,
here. What happened to the screen?
Okay, hold on, doctor. Now?
Yeah, okay, yeah.
Okay. Okay, can I start?
Yes, please. Go ahead.
Okay, good evening to doctor and fellow
Okay.
friends. Okay, so we are the first group to present, and today I'm presenting about change as an organizational process. So, what is change? Change is it's how you learn to adjust in order to achieve a desired result. And change has usually it has three forms, which is cognitive, the knowledge, effective, the attitude or about the self, and also psychomotor, which is the skills. So when does change happen actually? So mentor teaches an employee on how to act from not knowing to knowing to achieve an objective. For example, when there's a new employee who entered, so a mentor or a guide, which is usually the senior supervisor or senior employee who teaches the new income who has zero knowledge about something to do, about how to do and why, how they are going to achieve the company's objective. That is when change actually happens. So according to RIG 2015, the meaning is about change. What is change is how most adjust, evolve, or respond to the fast-moving external business environment, whether it's local and also global economies and technology and advancement. I'm sorry, can you hear me? Because my screen just back
Okay.
where I
Yes, I'm
am.
okay. I can hear you.
Okay. Okay. All right. So continuous changes on workplace process. It has system and strategies for organization to remain competitive or also to survive as this is their ultimate goal. So which is how which is most companies or organizations fail to do so. It is actually how they respond and tackle the situation to the constant stage of change is what most organization nowadays fails to comprehend, and that is why most organization cease to exist. So next, effects of change. Okay, there are the most important effect of change is important asset of it is the people. It's mostly they lose their people, uh, which is why it's costly due to the associated recruitment costs, and also it's because of time involved on getting new employees up to speed, and also losing essential intimate knowledge of your company. For example, that I've experienced, McDonald's. Once every second an employee leaves the door, a, a part of your company leaves together with them. For example, the recipes or how do you prepare any menu of it. So that is the effects of the change, which they might lose their people. Next is change management plan. Okay, there are 6 key steps of change management plan. For one, it's clearly, number one is clearly define change and align it to business goals. It is the most obvious and vital step that many organizations miss most of the time. So It's analytical review against the objective, and also performance goals to ensure change carry in the right direction. So this is the first key step that every organization should start with. And then what does this do is actually it assists in determining the value of change, which also quantify the effort you put in. So next is determine impacts and those affected. Okay, once you know what you are going to do, then you see the impacts of change from all the levels, like every level, every organizational level, it has different levels. So you should actually determine and evaluate the impacts. What are the possible levels of the organization? It is also, and also review effect on each unit, every unit of the organization, and how is cascades to organization to an individual. So how does it cascade? You imagine, you think of how is cascade from the organization to the individual. And also it starts, usually it starts from the blueprint where the training and support is needed, mostly to meditate the impacts. Number 3 is develop a communicating strategy. Okay, of course, communication is essential in organization, and all employees are supposed to be taken to communicate with and to change. But there are highlighted employees that you absolutely must communicate to change. Like, in order for you to make that changes, there are some particular group of management people or either some focused group of employees that you have to communicate individually to make that change, that particular change. It also determine most effective means that will bring them on board, and also what you need to include in your communication is the timeline of how long the change will incrementally communicate, the key messages, and also the channels that you want to use, and also the mediums that you used for your communication. So next is provide effective training. Okay, provide effective training is usually it's like how do you say this? Uh, okay, to know your employees. Okay, to let your employees know that they will be receiving certain training. Either it's structured or it's informal, and also for you to teach skills and knowledge required, that is needed to operate efficiently as the change is rolled out. And also there are a certain example of training and support. For example, micro learning online module, or also a blended learning that is incorporated with face-to-face training, or usually that I've experienced most company do is on the job coaching and mentoring, like sambil kerja sambil belajar, like that. So as you do the job, as you do it, and then you learn at the same time. And then next is implement a support structure, which is you assist your employees to uh, uh, emotionally and practically adjust to change and to build proficiency of behavior and technical skills needed for the results. And also it is also by emotionally you may also support them by providing counseling to help them navigate the situation, so that it's not a sudden change which creates a depression or any emotional pressure to the employees. So you might give them emotional support by providing counseling. And also another way is mentorship, or also an open door policy management to allow them to come in either to a specific person or either a specific group of management to ask questions needed for them to further understand or to further train themselves and to adjust themselves for the change. And then last one is measure change process. Okay, every part of the process, it's essential for you to document it, to measure it later on. It is a structure that should be put to measure the impact of the change and also ensured continuous reinforcements opportunities exist to build the proficiency. It's also important for you to ensure that the continued reinforcements opportunities exist to build the proficiency to actually make it happen, and also to evaluate the change management plan to determine effectiveness and also document any lesson that is learned, any good impacts or either bad impacts, lessons that is learned. So next, okay, according to Kurt Lewin's force field analysis, there are two types of forces. According to Heinz 2012, one is driving forces, which is sent to initiate change, and one is restraining forces, forces acting to decrease driving process. So what does it mean is driving forces usually affect the situation by pushing it in particular direction. Example, managers that eliminate break time, that they cut off the break time for their employees. They don't allow the employees to take the break time, pushing them to work continuously or to do overtime, something like that. And restrain, which is example like the employee themselves, they are offering resistance. So usually driving forces may activate the restraining force. So you have to decrease the restraining force to encourage the change and to initiate the plan, the changes that you planned. Okay, so these are a graph, a picture that's taken from the Highness 2015. I retrieved it from Google. So this part is the forces for change, and this part is the forces resisting. For example, you can look at it like global economics is the forces of change, and the forces of resisting change is the period of time in present role. Second is intensity of competition, the status and perks of the office under the threat. It may be the forces of resistant change. And also reduced costs, no apparent reasons for changes proposed. Move to cross-functional teams, the forces of resisting may be lack of understanding of proposed changes. New CEO, the fear of inability to cope with new role, or the fear of inability to cope with new people as well. And also a speed of technological change, social trends and changes. It's also a resisting, forces of resisting may be concern over job security. So next, the Kurt Lewin's change model theory. Okay, according to George 2019, there are 3 stages of change model theory. Not one. The first is unfreeze, which is the process of discarding old methods and ready to adapt new. And then the next stage is the change, which is is a stage where people begin to resolve their uncertainty and look for new ways to do things. Uh, they believe and they act accordingly in a way to support new direction. And also refreeze the stability of the group after a new behavior has been adopted. So these are the three main stages in change model theory. So if any of these steps fails, they usually encounter resistance as the um, old practice or values that resurface to counter change. And I took it from Google, retrieved from here. So the first stage is, as I said, the unfreeze determines what is needs to change and ensure there is strong support from the management, create the need for change, manage and understand the doubts and concerns. And during stage change, you have to communicate often, you dispel rumors, empower the action, involve people in the process, and during the refreeze stage, anchor the changes into the culture. You develop ways to sustain the change, provide support, training, and also if it's a success, usually which will be, celebrate successes. So these are the references, three main references that we took our data from. Thank you.
Are you done?
Yes, sir.
Oh, that was quick. All right, never mind. Uh, you made some good points. Let's let's look at the slides about beginning with change in itself. I think it was your second slide.
Effects of change.
Back one more. The change in cognitive change. All right, this one, right?
Yes.
Because I think this one deals with just the human change, behavioral change in terms of learning, right? So that is why focuses on cognitive change, affective change, and also psychomotor change. Yes, in OD, that is also part of change that we are interested in. It is the behavior part of the change, in where we try to change people's competency, for example, right? People's knowledge in this matter. So learning is the focus of Rick in 2015, right? So that's why he looks into cognitive change, affective change, and psychomotor change. So this is much more learning oriented. Now, when we look at organization change, there are also other changes that we are interested in. Like I mentioned in the beginning, change happens in the environment, right? Things change. There are economic changes, there are political changes, there are social changes, there are technological changes, right? And then there's changes in the legal environment and also changes in the natural environment. So these are the changes which probably influences or have impacts on the organization itself. It causes the organization to change. And as such, the organization need to respond to these changes. And that is the reason why we look into change as something that is planned by organizations. Okay? Although there may be, to some extent, unplanned changes, but in the case of organization development, the changes are actually planned change, right? We respond to some type of changes, or we anticipate something is going to happen to the organization in the future, right? So when we anticipate changes or when we want to institute changes, like for example, we want the organization to grow, that is something that we desire. And we have that as a goal. And when we have growth as a change, then we plan for the growth, right? We plan to have more employees, for example. We have to put in more facilities and infrastructure. We have to look at technology, right? So these are probably things that we plan for, okay? And then we talk about, for example, changes that we did not anticipate. For example, most organizations have not anticipated COVID or the pandemic, and that is always the case. We did not expect it to happen, or even if we thought there was some pandemic, it would not be to this effect, where people remain indoors and cannot go to work, where a sizable amount of the population loses work, and then there's retrenchment, right? It is of a size that we have not anticipated. So what do organizations do in light of the pandemic? So these are things that we will continue to observe as we go on, right? Let's move along to the next slide, which I think you talk about the force field analysis, right? Okay, force field analysis is very interesting in the sense that, yes, Lewin came up with the restraining forces and the driving forces, right? Because he talks about organizations being what he calls to be in a quasi-equilibrium state. Quasi-equilibrium state meaning that although the organization appears to be stable at a certain point in time, right? But there is in fact shifts, right? For example, in production of their goods, cars being produced, right? They report production at, for example, 1,000 cars a month. So that is what is apparently an equilibrium state, a production of 1,000 cars a month. But in reality, it is not 1,000, right? It can be 950, or sometimes it goes up to 1,100. So there are increases and decreases in production. And so when we see that equilibrium in production, it actually goes up and down. So that is what Lewin calls a quasi-equilibrium state. Now, why does that quasi-equilibrium state happen? Because there are two forces that actually are impinging on that equilibrium, right? Sometimes when the driving forces are stronger, it pushes up production. And when the restraining forces, for example, absenteeism or a machine breakdown, that would be a restraining force, and that will cause a fall in production. Driving forces, for example, suddenly people feel excited, people feel motivated to do work. Yes, that drives up the production, right? We can look at any equilibrium, for example, defects for that matter, right? If there are defects, then the defect rate probably about, well, maybe we report a zero defect, but zero defect is not actually zero. Zero defect sometimes is to a matter of 10 per 1 million or 100 to 1 million. It depends on how the organization defects, how the organization defines zero defect, right? But that number of defective product goes up and down. Although we say zero defect is at probably 100 units a month, but sometimes it could be 80, sometimes it could be 120, sometimes it could be 100, and sometimes it could be 50. It all depends on the driving forces that are acting on that equilibrium, right? On months or in months that workers are productive, then the defects, for example, will be reduced. Or if there is a big accident or big fault with the machinery, then probably the defects will increase. That is what is called the quasi-equilibrium. And there are driving forces and also restraining forces. So restraining forces can be seen to be negative forces that are affecting the equilibrium state, while driving forces are positive forces, right? Drives up productivity, for example, right? We'll be revisiting this time and time again throughout the semester when we discuss about organization change and development. But it is an important model to understand change and planned change, because it looks at what factors can be changed to improve driving forces, or what factors can be changed to reduce the restraining forces, right? Training your employees, for example, could reduce restraining forces, right? Or in a way also, training increases the driving forces, because people get more competent, they become much more productive. That is how we look at that force field analysis. All right, good. Now let's move on to another interesting model which you presented, which is the change model, again by Lewin, right? So I don't know, maybe George just wrote about the 3 stages, but actually Lewin's force change model was actually introduced in way back after World War II in 1947. But somehow, although a lot of people, or we attribute the model to Kurt Lewin, but he did not actually write any papers or there are no documented evidence that he actually proposed the model. So there's no published documents about Lewin's change model, although it is attributed to him. So what I suspect is that he talks about this change model, although he did not write about it. But that's all right. It is still now known as Lewin's change model. And when we talk about Lewin's change model, then there are 3 parts of it. Can we see the next slide? I think when you present it in a much more graphic form. Let's see the next slide. Okay, good. Right? So there are 3 stages when we talk about Lewin's change model. There's the first stage would be to unfreeze, which is basically about preparing for the change, right? And to prepare for the change is what we plan to do. And this would be the analogy of an ice, right? Suppose we want to change an ice cube into an ice tube, right? Cube, C-U-B-E, into a tube, T-U-B-E. What do we do? Of course, number 1, because the ice is in a solid state, we have to unfreeze it, right? So that is basically the preparation for change. And what do we need to do that, right? So the need to change the ice from a solid state to a liquid state will be to leave it out in a temperature above 0 degrees centigrade, right? And leaving it out for a moment, the ice will change into water or into a liquid form. And that is the unfreezing part of it. And then when we move, although you have here as change, Lewin put it as move, M-O-V-E, right? So move means to change that state into a different state. So in this change, in this process is to actually put that ice into a mold, which is tubular in nature. And that is the change process. And then to start freezing it, right? So there are things that we need to do at this stage about the ice. And finally, although you put here as refreeze, in Lewin's model, he just put that as freeze. So in the original model, unfreeze, move, and freeze, right? Although yes, it doesn't matter as much whatever you label them, but I'm just talking about the original model. Original model, unfreeze, move, and freeze, right? Of course, the concept is similar, where you have to change, and before you change, you have to unfreeze, and then you move, you change it, and then you refreeze it again to stabilize the change. Now, how does this model work in real life? Now, if we look at it, if we want to institute change, let's say we want to introduce online learning, like what we are doing right now, right? All this while, in the universities, we have been teaching classes using face-to-face activities in class. And then suddenly we have to do it online, not only because it's a pandemic, but also it's going to be the future of education, where most learning activities are conducted online. It is a different mode of learning altogether. From having a physical interaction between the instructor and the learner, now it is much more of a virtual learning. And we have to depend on some form of technology in order to do that. Now, for example, in this case, we are using Zoom meeting. So there is technology that can assist us in the change. But to unfreeze is to prepare both the instructors and also the students into a new mode of teaching and learning. It's good in a way that we have the pandemic, because then we're actually forced to do it. And having to force to do it, then unfreezing would be part of it. Is what do we need to do, right? So we think about possibilities. Number one, we think about what technology is available for us to do online teaching and learning. And then number two, we have to ensure that the instructors and the students know how to do it. And we have to train instructors. I have to learn as an instructor. I have to learn the techniques of using Zoom application, for example. How to schedule classes, what I need. So I have to get a computer that has audio and a visual function that can record, that is good enough, and I have to make sure that there's internet, right? It's all a different procedure. And I have to learn how to do it. So that is actually the unfreezing part, preparing people for the change, right? And then ensure there is strong support from the management. Of course, the management has to support any change initiative in the organization, because without the management support, then we will not have the policies that are required to make sure that change is done. We do not have the infrastructure, right? We will not have the system to monitor teaching and learning activities, for example. So top management will ensure that all those facilities and procedures are put into place, and there are systems in which we can actually monitor and also assess that learning and teaching initiative, right? So management support. And then of course, create a need for change. In this case, there's no choice for us but to teach online. But if, for example, the pandemic is not here, COVID-19 is not here, then we have to convince people that it is necessary to change, right? We have to convince people that it is easier to do it online. Although there are things that we need to prepare online, which is different from teaching in class, we need to convince them, right? It's much more convenient, it's much more cheaper, right? We don't have to go to class, I can stay at home, I don't have to commute. So those are actually the driving force for me to change. And when those driving forces are strong enough, it can overcome the restraining forces. Like, for example, hey, I don't have the tools that I need, for example, right? But if I see there's a possibility, then I will get the tools. I'll find ways to learn how to do teaching online, right? But because of there's a pandemic, then there's no choice or very, very little choice for me. If I want to continue teaching, then I have to get ready to do online, right? Manage and understand doubts and concerns. What are the inabilities? What are the incompetencies? What are the lack of technology, for example? We have to make sure, right? So among the students also, we have to make sure that they have the tools to learn online, right? That they have sufficient internet capacity, right? I know some of the last semesters, there are students who actually have to go to, when this was during the MCO itself, I know students who have to go to police stations because the police station in their village is the only place that has public broadband, right? They can access broadband in public, right? And of course, we all know the story of the student, what's her name, who had to go up the tree to do her exam in Sabah?
Viviana.
Ah,
Viviana.
yes. Those are the things that happen, and those are the things that we have to prepare for, and that is part of the unfreezing part, right? To prepare for the change and convince people, yes, let's change. And once we have unfrozen, because remember, what is learning? Learning, part of learning is also unfreezing. To unlearn old habits, to unlearn old competencies, and get new things, get new ways of living, right? And then once people are convinced that they will change, then we will change. Have the change institutionalized. Yes, UPM is going online, and we announce it, and we implement it, and we launch it, right? And then during that time also we have to manage the change, right? Those tweaking, we have to make sure if there's no people who don't have internet service, make sure that they get internet service. Or if they don't have the tools, for example, they don't have computers that can record, that have audio and visual capabilities, provide them with that, let them borrow those tools, for example. Those are actually part of moving, getting the change instituted, right? And getting people to be involved in the process. We can look at the same, all other changes that have been implemented in organizations, right? When you, for example, ISO was introduced into organizations, it's the same thing. We have to prepare people for ISO. We have to convince them that ISO is actually better, right? And once they're prepared, then we actually implement the change, where we actually launch and also we actually use the system. That is the moving part of it. But after we have changed, we have to ensure that that change is stabilized. That change is continued to be practiced. People continue to teach online. People continue to document activities under ISO. Right? So this is the freezing part of it. And like the name suggests, we're going to freeze the change so that it becomes part of the practice of the organization. And to do that, we have to anchor the change into the culture of the organization. We'll be discussing about organization culture, right? We have to have the artifacts, we have to have the values associated with the change, and we have to have the underlying assumptions that are associated with the change. So, for example, underlying assumption, we must always assume that online learning is necessary. And once we have the assumption that there's no other way but to practice online learning, then we will have the values. Yes, let's do a good job teaching online, right? Let's continue to improve our online teaching. It's still a very early process of teaching online, but we will probably get better, right? Right now, it's probably very, I suppose, uncomfortable to teach online. It's not very exciting, but soon those things will begin to change as we begin to develop new ways of doing things and we use better technologies. And those technologies will become available soon. And as we develop our competency, we will soon be able to get more engagement, for example, in classes. So these are the things that we have to do to make sure. And then also the university has to ensure that there is a system that continues to support the change, that ensures that online learning can happen smoothly and assessment and monitoring can be done accordingly, right? So this is all part of the stabilizing process. And finally, well, we should celebrate success. We acknowledge and we recognize efforts that have contributed to improve online learning, for example. And this is what we do to celebrate success. So a very important model in change is actually what we call the Lewin's change process model, in which we look at unfreezing, changing, and freezing. I will give you an example soon. Have I told you all the have I don't know, because my classes are so, there's another class up here, distance education. Have I talked about ayam mas? Ayam mas? You all know ayam
Not
mas?
yet. Not yet.
Not yet. I haven't talked. But are you familiar with ayam mas?
Yes, sir.
Okay. What I'm going to do, Bateswari, you can stop sharing,
Okay.
and then I'm going to share. There's a stop sharing button. Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Are you all familiar with this? I think nowadays it's not as popular as before. But I think about at least maybe 10 years back, almost everyone knows ayam mas. But nowadays, ayam mas, even if you look at their performance, they have actually experienced losses recently, right? So, but ayam mas in itself is an interesting example of change and the change process, right? So Ayamas initially started off as a unit within, anyone knows? Was actually a unit under an organization. Anyone knows what organization that was or what company it was?
FC.
KFC, right? So if you are familiar with KFC, I think I forgot. I think the first KFC outlet was in Sungai Wang Plaza, wasn't it? Sungai Wang, and then there's another one in Jalan Tuanku Abdul Rahman at that time. Jalan Tuanku Abdul Rahman, or rather was more known as Batu Road then, right? Jalan Tuanku Abdul Rahman, right in front of GS Gill, that sports fair, was quite a well-known sports store, GS Gill. But right in front of it was Ayam Mas. And at that time, no, not Ayam, sorry. At that time, it was Kentucky, right in front of GS Gill was Kentucky Fried Chicken. And Kentucky Fried Chicken, when it was first introduced way back, I think in the 70s, late 70s or early 80s. I also forgot, but we can look that up easily, right? It was the first time that we ate fried chicken in an air-conditioned outlet. And at that time, we actually were served fried chicken, Kentucky Fried Chicken, on ceramic plates. And we used fork and spoons that were made of steel, right? So it was, of course, a classy experience to eat Kentucky Fried Chicken. At that time, it cost, I think, about 4 ringgit for a two-piece snack, I think, about 4 ringgit or 3 ringgit, something 4 ringgit, right? So it was quite cheap. Well, that time 4 ringgit was also what we have now. You can always convert it about 10 times the price of then and now. So what would have about now it's what about 15 ringgit, two-piece snack plate, right? But then was about 3 ringgit. Or I forgot. Well, I can look that up later. But it was quite a good experience to eat at KFC. But KFC, in order for it to have its chicken, right? They have to have a certain quality. Of course, they have a unit within KFC itself that actually process the chicken, right? And that chicken and that processing part was done by this unit that was in Old Klang Road. So they had a processing plant in Old Klang Road. Let's see what the next slide. Okay. So what this unit did was to supply chicken that was cut into 9 pieces. KFC made sure that it was 9 pieces, right? So this is somewhat of the history of Ayam Mas. So after a while, Kentucky Fried Chicken began to think, hey, wait a minute. So in 1982, if I'm not mistaken, they changed that unit into a subsidiary. And as a subsidiary, at that time, they had to survive. Because all this while, as a unit under KFC, they were considered more as a cost center. Right? The cost center doesn't bring in profit. It drives up the cost of the organization, and as such, KFC decided to turn that unit into a subsidiary by itself. And as a subsidiary, Ayam Mas had to think about making profit, because without profit, it cannot survive. It had to pay for its workers, it had to pay for its raw products. We'll be talking about how KFC got its supply, right? So KFC basically had about 60 over farmers under its umbrella scheme. So what KFC did, KFC had its own hatchery. Hatchery is where they had layers imported from Scotland, roast chicken, and also Hubbard from France, right? So these two breeds of chicken actually produce eggs, and those eggs were hatched at the hatchery. I think they were in Bangi, and Lingi, and Tampin, right? So these hatcheries produce one-day-old chicks. And that one-day-old chick was sent to their farmers under their contract scheme. So all these farmers had to do was to make sure that they brought up the chicken to the size that is required by KFC. So under contract, all they had to do was look after the chicken and make sure that the chicken grew to about 1.75 to 1.8 kilograms each. And when they reached that weight, they were sent to the processing plant. And in the beginning, the processing plant was in Old Klang Road, right? But after in 1988, they opened, Ayam Mas opened their plant in Port Klang, right? And in Port Klang is where they begin to change, to begin to process their birds. In the beginning, was just about, I think they produced only about 7,000, they processed about 7,000, 6,000, 7,000 birds because it's just for the consumption of KFC. But when they were changed into a subsidiary, they had to they had to supply KFC with 65% of their birds, of the chicken to KFC, and 35% they were able to sell. So they got their money, one from KFC by selling their chickens to KFC, and for another 35%, they could market and sell it elsewhere, right? How did they sell it, or where did they sell it? And if any of you remember in the beginning, we had KFC, Ayam Mas processed chicken at supermarkets, right? So if we were to go to supermarkets, we can buy Ayam Mas chicken processed. And they were clean because one, it was certified halal. Because part of Ayam Mas objective or goals were to supply halal chicken to Malaysia, and that was good because processed chicken at that time was, well, no, people had doubts about quality. But when they see the Ayam Mas pack processed chicken, people were confident. Number one, they were confident that it was halal, and number two, they were confident that it was of good quality, right? So that was how Ayam Mas started making its business, 65% to KFC, and another 35% they sold to supermarkets as processed chicken, right? So that was early on. So they produced very little, 7,000, but as they grew, and there was a plan, they grew because they need to make profits. They need to make more profits, and to make more profits, they had to grow. And in order to grow, they had to process more chicken so that they can sell more chicken. KFC also grew, but you see, in the end, there's only so much that KFC can take. So Ayam Mas had to think about how to diversify their products. And when they opened their Port Klang facility, I think in 1983 or something, right? Then 1988, it became full operations. the number of chicken increased, number of chicken processed per day increased, right? So in the beginning, 6,000, 7,000, and it came to 12,000, 15,000, 20,000, 21,000, 40,000. So the number of chickens to be processed grew. And you can imagine, as the number of chickens to be processed in a day grew, they also had to increase the number of employees. And that is one thing, right? So this page talks about how ayam mas grew, right? And they, in the beginning, they supplied processed chicken to supermarkets, and then they opened their own outlets, right? They had their own shops, ayam mas. And I think the first one was in Sipa. That was the first ayam mas outlet. And then they begin to expand as they began to see better demand for their products, right? So they sold not only chicken, processed chicken, but also began to sell chicken parts like wings, right? So later on only they began to sell processed chicken like, well, of course, chicken. And then they have bone-in category of chicken, which is basically processed, like they have fried chicken. So drumettes, for example, where they already fried and packed, right? Also, if you remember in the beginning, they also sold roast chicken, right? Nowadays, I don't think they sell roast chicken anymore, unless it's already processed and packed, right? But you see, they sell minced meat, they sell burgers, they sell sausages. This was all part of their growth. In order to have more products, they had to diversify the products to be able to sell more chicken, right? The thing is that when they had to sell more chicken, there were also an increase of number in the chickens that they process a day, and as such, they also grew, right? So the first one here is their Port Klang facility, right? And then they opened another one in Bukit Mertajam, and then also another one in Johor. Where was it? Tenggara, Johor Tenggara, I think, right? Tenggara. So the one in Port Klang was able to produce 82,000 birds a day, right? And that was a lot of chicken. And if you can imagine the processing of chicken, so there were suppliers that brought in, or I mean, they actually their own lorries transported the chicken from the suppliers to the plant, right? So the chicken came to the plant, right? And as you can see, this is probably how the chickens were delivered, right? And in the Port Klang facility, they had this also at the back. The chicken were delivered. And the chicken were all live chicken because they want to ensure that it was halal. And part of halal is to ensure that you process live chicken, you slaughter live chicken, right? So they brought in the chicken, and then there were people who actually slaughtered the chicken. And then after slaughtering the chicken, well, they defeathered the chicken and also took out the guts and so on to clean up the chickens. And then the chicken were cut into pieces, 9 pieces in this case, and then packed. That was the basic process of chicken, right? Now, can you imagine when you cut up chicken? You have to use very sharp knives, right? And when you use sharp knives, there's always a chance that you will injure yourself. You have a knife in one hand, and then you want to hold the chicken in another hand. How do you think they prevented the employee from cutting or injuring themselves? So if you think about finger licking good, then that would be a possibility, you see, because the sharp knife is already there. But somehow they had to protect the workers. How do you think we can protect workers so that they don't cut their hands? What can you do? And there was this one in the beginning, it was not automated yet. It was all manual, right? So the chicken after being slaughtered were cleaned, and then it went on the conveyor belt. The conveyor belt, the people there were sitting, and they actually cut the chicken into 9 pieces as they were trained, right? So to prevent injury, what they used was, have you seen a chained glove? Right? The ones that is made of chain, steel chain, but a glove. Well, if you watch old war movies where they wear the armor, you can see that chain. So it was just like that chain. So that chain actually prevented workers from getting injured, although they used something. That was the thing, right? The other thing was employees. Now you are processing an increasing number, and your plant grew. And of course, you need more employees. In the beginning, where do you think the workers came from? This was way back in the 80s, early 80s. Not many Indonesian workers yet, so a lot of workers actually came from Kelantan, because Kelantan is somehow they are very adventurous. They go, but you know, after a while, workers working with chicken. Number one, if you have ever worked with chicken, it's not a pleasant job, right? Even at home, if you were to prepare just one chicken, the first thing that you notice was the smell of the chicken on your hands. And imagine having to work with 10,000, 20,000 chickens a day. It's not only your hands will smell, your whole body will also smell chicken. Your hair will smell. You'll be smelling like a chicken at the end of the day. And as such, not many people work there for a long time, right? And soon, although ayam mas needs lots of workers, there was also a high turnover, and they had to replace workers all the time. And soon they got in workers, so from Sabah, Sarawak, and then later on they got in workers from Indonesia. And then at one time, Indonesia also stopped sending workers to Malaysia, and they got workers from Bangladesh, right? And then later on, nowadays, I think most workers are from either Vietnam and Myanmar also nowadays. But, you know, managing workers is another big challenge. Now, if you just notice among the Indonesians themselves, among the Indonesians, there are two primary groups that could never work together. Anyone knows? Two groups who could never work together. The Floris and the Maduris. Madura dengan Floris. Because of their old, I suppose, disagreement and war between themselves, that has continued. So they can never work together. So the management has to ensure that these two groups of people never work on the same shift, especially they are working with knives and chain. It's just like having an armor and a very sharp knife. It's always a very dangerous place to work, and people who, if there were fights, then there would be a big problem. So IAMAS had to make sure that they work on different shifts. And later on, when the Bangladeshis came in, they also had to work, of course, with the remnant of the Indonesian workers. And as you know, Bangladeshis and Indonesians also don't get along very well, right? Why? The Bangladeshis and the Indonesians also don't get along very well because the Bangladeshis, they come here and as single men, right? What happened to, sorry. I think we lost, have we lost the slide? There was an issue with Chrome. Are you still, am I still on the, there?
Yes, yes, bro.
Okay,
Yeah, yeah, you're here.
yeah, wait, I can't, just a minute. Okay, got it. It's just the computer. All right, and then Bangladeshis, to cut the story short, Bangladeshis and Indonesians just cannot work together because the Bangladeshis mostly came just single as men, and of course they went after the Indonesian ladies, right? They are very sweet talkers also. If some of you have experience, adik manis, so generally they are able to win over the Indonesian ladies. And that did not create a very good atmosphere also. Okay. So the management also had to make sure that the Bangladeshis don't work with the Indonesians, right? And then also as the capacity of birds begin to increase and the challenge of getting workers were getting more difficult, KF's IAMAS had to think about a solution to the problem. Of course, automation was one of the solutions, where they begin to think of a machine that could actually cut the chicken into 9 pieces. And at that time, in Malaysia, there was no machine that actually cut or could cut chicken into 9 pieces. It could cut chicken into 4 pieces. It could cut chicken into 6 pieces, 8 pieces, but not 9 pieces. Because KFC had this requirement to have chicken cut into 9 pieces. So what IAMAS had to do was they had to send their technician to Germany to work with the scientists there to come up with a machine that could cut chicken into 9 pieces. And they managed to do that. And they had a machine that was brought in. So that was another thing that IAMAS did, right? So if you looked at the whole process of growth in itself, what were the changes that IAMAS had to do, right? Remember the 3 components of changes: structural changes, technological changes, and also behavioral changes. So those 3 changes were evident in IAMAS growth. Now let's look at the structural types of changes. What are the structural changes that IAMAS used? Number 1, as they become a subsidiary, they had to think about survival. And to survive, they had to think about selling more chicken. And to sell more chicken, they had to think of a strategy: where they want to sell, who they want to sell to, and how do they want to sell the chicken, right? So selling chicken to the supermarket, processed chicken, was one strategy, right? Diversifying the product was another strategy. Opening outlets was another strategy. And they had to think of their whole process, right from the supply, the processing, and the marketing, right? These were the three, right? The chicken supply. So they had to make sure that their farmers were able to supply them with chickens that are 1.75 to 1.8 kilograms. And this, they had to come up with the supply chain. They ensured that there was hatchery that produced one-day chick that were provided to the farmers, and the farmers had the facilities to rear the chicken to make sure that they grew up to 1.75 to 1.8 kilograms. And actually, Ayam Mas also provided the feed. So all the farmer had to do was to make sure, look after the chicken to make sure that the chickens grew. And when the chickens reached the weight that was wanted, Ayam Mas would then take the chickens and send it to the plant. And when it went to the plant, it was processed, right? And these are all the structural part, the structural aspects or components of organization change that Ayam Mas had to think through, right? Not only in terms of the goals, but also they had to think about the work processes that ensured that in the end, they get the product that they wanted, right? Also, they had to think about diversifying their products. As you can see, these are some of the products, right? A wide range of products, right? From fresh chicken, processed chicken, and they also had other products like, for example, sauce for the chicken, right? They had their roast chicken, and these are just some of the products, right? They had sausage, they had mince, they had burgers. So all these were part of diversifying, and it was all part of the structural types of organization development. So whenever we talk about structural changes, we think about how the organization organizes itself in order to achieve the production, in order to make sure that their core business can run as they want it to run, so that it can achieve the objectives that they have set out, right? And structural changes also involve the strategies that they develop. What they are going to sell, how they are going to sell, to whom they are going to sell to, where they are going to sell to. They open their own outlets, right? So all these are strategies and part of the structural change of the organization and part of the organization development. Okay, so the next component of change is, of course, the technological change. What is technology? Technology is just about tools that they use. Right? Technology is tools. So in this case, the tools that KFC uses, the tools that Ayam Mas uses, right from the rearing of chicken, right, to have a technology that ensures that birds reach a 45-day period at 1.7, it's not 45 days, it's actually 30 days. 30 days, 32 days, the chicken reaches 1.75 or 1.8 kilograms to be sent to the processing plant, right? They had to use technology for that to make sure that chicken grew up healthy, right? And then when chickens are sent to the processing plant, they are slaughtered, right? I think I used to think that KFC use automatic slaughtering machine. Nowadays, there are automatic slaughtering machine where you actually just put the chicken on a hanger and there's a blade that actually slaughter chicken. Because, well, all you need is for the vein to be severed, right? But I think they still use people who actually slaughter chicken one by one, and these are expert slaughterers, I suppose, right? So after the chicken are slaughtered, then they're cleaned, right? There's technology to defeather the chicken. There's technology to clean, and then nowadays you have the the machine, the automated machine that actually cut up the chicken into into 9 pieces. So these are all the technology that is involved. You have the knife and the steel chain, the chain gloves last time. Again, technology. So IMS had to think about all these tools that they need to use in order to produce chicken to be sold as processed chicken, right? And then there's also the behavior part of it, which first and foremost is to ensure the competency, that the workers were able to slaughter, that the workers were able to ensure that the chickens were processed correctly, that the chickens were able to cut up the chicken into 9 parts as it is being specified by KFC, right? To make sure that they work at a certain rate in order to ensure that they are able to produce 82,000 birds a day, right? All this needs the expertise. And like Vitaswari talked about just now, it involves a lot of learning and skill development. But they do not only have to think about training so that the workers reach a certain amount of skill, they have to think also about the turnover of workers, because recruitment of workers, there's always a very high turnover. They have to always get new workers to come in. And recruitment is also part of the behavior. And they have to make sure that the workers don't fight on the factory floor. And this is where they make sure that the groups that have been known to have bad blood with each other don't work on the same floor at the same time, right? And this is part of the behavioral management, right? So as you can see in the case of Ayam Mas in itself, how organization development is taken into account, especially to make sure that the organization is able to grow and continue to survive in the environment, right? The types of chicken they use, that would be the technology. Okay? So these 3 things, right? The structural changes, the technological changes, and the behavioral changes are always part of organization development and change. Okay, so I think that's about it for thinking about that change process and the introduction, I suppose, again, to the organization development process using, I think, thank you for the presentation on change, Vitaswari, a good presentation. And then we've talked a bit about what we need to think about when we want to insert organization development process, especially in ensuring that unfreezing, moving, and freezing part, and then making sure that all the forces are changed so that the driving forces and when the driving forces and the restraining forces are equal, then we have an equilibrium. And if we want to change, then we have to reduce the restraining forces and increase the driving forces, right? That would be Kurt Lewin's model for what we call the field force analysis. So Lewin, 2 models that we have to take into account throughout the semester: the change model in itself, unfreeze, move, and freeze, and also the force field analysis and looking at the driving forces and also the restraining forces, right? And we've looked at organization development exercises in IAMAS that looks into the growth and the change that IAMAS needed to do to ensure that it was able to continue to survive and continue to grow within its environment. Okay, any questions? Any thoughts? Any opinions?
Yeah, yes, Dr. Noraini here. Okay, I just want to know whether what is the ideal timeline for the organization change? Is it for in 4 years time, or
Okay.
can it
Well,
be frequent? Yeah.
specifically, there is no timeline. That is actually decided by the management, right? And also the type of change that they want. For example, changing to online learning, that was a very fast required change. We had to do fast. Within one semester, in fact, within the semester, we had to change. So after the MCO was over, in fact, during the MCO, we already had to use online learning. And that was a very quick change, right? And some changes are very quick. You had to change within a day. But in most cases, I suppose, there is a timeline that is decided, right? For example, if the government wants to institute or want to implement ISO, or any organization want to introduce ISO in the organization, that will take a period anywhere between 6 months to about 2 years, right? UPM, I think we took about 2 years to introduce ISO in teaching, right? From getting people to buy in the idea of ISO 9000 in teaching and in doing the work in our work, until we actually implemented it and actually got the certificate. And when you get the certificate, you have to ensure that you continue to hold the certificate, ISO, right? And that is when you have to be audited. And that auditing process is actually part of stabilizing the change in the case of ISO, right? So some changes, like the government also had the government transformation, civil service transformation program. How long did that take? Right? There's still organizations that are, well, I think it took anywhere from 2 years to be introduced and to fully implement the change, right? And then to ensure that the change continues. Right? And I also remember last time when I think I'll talk about it also as another example of change, probably in our next class, where UPM actually went to computerization, right? How UPM was computerized. That was also a very interesting change, right? And UPM has also undergone a lot of changes, right? Not only in terms of the facilities that we have, but also in terms of what we actually do until we have achieved to reach top 200 in the ranking list of top 100, right? But to get there, we had to undergo a change process that probably took about 20 years, right? When I started working in 1986, right? I think the focus was much more on teaching and also public service. There was not much emphasis on publishing, journals and writing and research until, I suppose, the new VC, the second VC is Professor Said Jaluddin. Right, Professor Said Jaluddin took over the VC post. Then things began to change, right? We shifted from a teaching university to a much more research university, right? Until where we are now. We are much more focused on research and publication. Although our teaching is still part of our function, but the main focus of the university as a research university now is research, like most other universities. And that change in itself took about 20 plus years for us to achieve where we are right now, right? And within that change itself, right, we used to be University Pertanian Malaysia, and then we changed the name to University Putra Malaysia. And that was all also part of that change strategy that we use in order to become a research university where we are right now. So there's no timeline. Some changes, where necessary, have to be achieved on a very fast, rapid basis. Some changes took time. But we must remember that the more difficult the change, the longer it will take time. And it also is a factor of the organization culture. That's why I say organization culture is a very important aspect of the change process because it involves people. And when you change, it's about changing people. So think about organization culture. Thank you, Dorani. Any other thoughts?
No, sir.
Doctor,
Yes.
Faizatul here.
Yeah,
Okay, I
Faizatul.
just want to ask, organization, in order to survive, they adopted change, but they did it in the wrong direction that resulted in their failure.
Oh, yes.
So what is your opinion?
Definitely, right? We talked about Kodak last week, or Kodak, right? Kodak took many or made many wrong types of changes. They made mistakes. Number one, they did not adopt the digital technology. That was already a big mistake. Number two, they even bought, I think, Sterling Drugs or something, a big chemical company, because they wanted the chemical to be continually, they wanted to secure the chemical that they use for their negative processing. That was also a big mistake because they spent a lot of money, and in the end, that did not provide them the returns that they required, right? So yes, mistakes after mistakes cost them their continued existence, and thereby Kodak has, I suppose, has ceased to exist. We also may want to look at, for example, Mars, for example. They are in big trouble. The only thing that is saving them is all because the government keeps pumping money. But if they were just an organization itself, private organization itself, they would have closed down long ago. They made mistakes after mistakes, right? They, for example, sold off or actually privatized their on-board catering service, right? That actually could have made money. In fact, it made money after they sold off or privatized their on-board catering, right? And then there were lots of other mistakes. They, for example, buying a Airbus 380 was not a good strategy, right? Having too many routes that did not bring profit was a bad strategy. And overall, I think there were lots. They did not manage their leakage very well. So we can look at a lot of companies, especially those companies that are closing down, right? Nowadays, companies that did not prepare for online sales are beginning to feel the pressure of closing down, right? So we will, of course, the other thing we'll be looking at organization life cycle. They will be also looking at some of the issues of making wrong decisions, and then, because when we talk about life cycle, it's just like the life of a person, the organization, right from birth till it dies, right? And that happens. A lot of organization has ceased to exist. Yes, thank you, Vanilla.
Doctor,
Yes, please.
do you think Malindo,
Hmm.
Malindo fails to respond to the changes?
In fact,
Or-
yeah, I think most airline has. Even if you look at SIA, SIA also did not anticipate such a big impact on their business. No, I think the tourism and the travel industry, most organizations did not anticipate this level of effect on their business. So it was too bad. I think Malindo, because of their size, I suppose, and not only Malindo, I suppose Air Asia also, for that matter, will have a hard time. And most airlines in the world are going to be closing down. That's why Singapore, I think one of the things that Singapore did, they have this flight to nowhere. Have you heard about that promotion? Flight to nowhere. You just stay on the plane and get served food, and so it's just like, I suppose, people want to relieve that travel, and I don't think that's going to work also, right? The hotel also, like last week, also we talked about that they are going to have some programs that, in a way, I suppose, reduces the stress, but it's not the solution. What they need are airlines, they need passengers, and hotels, they need to have guests to stay. And this is not going to happen soon enough. So again, very interesting, I suppose, interesting development in our lives. Something we probably can tell our grandchildren. Oh, our people, we have people who talk about, oh, I was in World War II when the Japanese occupied Malaysia. So I suppose at least we have something to tell our grandchildren. Oh, I was around at a time when COVID was a pandemic. Thank you. Who else is here today? I'll just stop sharing this. How do I get everybody? How many people are left here? I don't have the information really. Oh, there you go. We still have 23 participants. I can't get it onto the picture.
Sorry, Dr. Kidin. Before we break,
Yes.
before we go to
Before
Sohat.
we
Okay.
dismiss the class.
Yes. Okay. I have one question because okay, for example, we have get because one organization to make a changes from, I think, organization, and then Dr. said before and then just mentioned about no duration or no period about change the organization, a certain organization. And then how about, I think, the change, the one organization to make a change about the 5 years, after 5 years, and then still we have deficit. They have deficit about I think the loss of money about the product. Okay, so how about maybe the action plan to make another changes, or just close the, I think, the company, and then they say so. That's why maybe the some I think maybe the rebranding and the I think the product or whatever. Maybe have the solution about before the decide to close the operation.
Yes, true. A lot of organizations, I suppose, made incorrect decisions. Number one, we have to look at the type of change they want to achieve, right? Sometimes that change is not the right thing or not the right change to have, right? Other times, yes, it could be the right change, but then the procedures or the process that they adopted to go about the change is not correct. They chose the wrong strategy, right? For example, they did not convince, they did not sell their change well. So people, the employees or the people in the organization did not buy in the idea of change, and as such, there was still very strong resistance within the organization. That is another thing that we will look at in our course. It's about the resistance to change, right? And then also sometimes there were not strong management support. Management did not provide the support and the facilities for change. That also could be a reason why change was not effective. And also there was change that, for example, was not in line with the culture, or people did not address the organization culture. We have some examples of that also. So we will go through that slowly as we go through the courses. Yes. So if change does not work, number one, look at the reason why it did not work. And yes, probably we have to just put it aside and let's start anew with some other change process. So the first thing that you have to look into is, for example, is the change necessary? Is the change the right direction that we want to take? Will people buy the idea of change? Can people change? Will there be enough facilities or enough support for the change? Can the change be institutionalized? So those are probably some of the questions that we always have to ask at the beginning of deciding on a change direction. Thank you, everybody. Let's roll.
Okay, welcome. Thank you.
One last question, maybe? We have time, don't worry. We're going to present next week. Let's see. So next week, we're going to have factors that influence organization change. Yes, we have talked about a bit of the environmental factors, go deeper into that also. And this will probably also be answering part of Nasrul's concern, why change don't work, right? So there are always factors, look into those factors. And this will be Mahfuz, Azlan, and Nadia's presentation. Are you okay with that, Mahfuz, Azlan, and Nadia?
Okay,
Yes.
Doctor.
All right. So we look forward to next week and hope to have just a discussion as good as what we had today. I will, as usual, have some readings to be put on later. All right. So if there's nothing else, I can somehow get this everyone to be on this. Can only get 6. Sure, great. Can see. All right, never mind. I think we'll find another way to get the attendance for today. I'm not sure it's Normi, Dr. Nomi or Dr. Faid around today? No?
Dr. Faik maybe already leave the meeting.
On the list?
Prof, I tried to capture our all the participants in the group. I already pasted in the WhatsApp.
If you can do that, thank you. Because somehow they need proof that the classes actually went on and people actually attended. All right, thank you, Rasul. Mahfuz, right? Try to do that. Because somehow I just
Already done.
can't get the grid to show everyone today like I was able to do last time. All right, never mind. As long as I can get the participation, the attendance list, we'll find a way to do that. All right, then. Thank you very much for your attention. I hope it was beneficial for you. I'll see you all again next week. So if you have any questions, just go on the WhatsApp. All right. Have a good night. Take care. Bye.
Thank you, Doctor.
Thank you, Doctor.
Thank you, Prof.
Thank you, Doctor.
Thank you, doctor.
Thank
you, Doctor.
See you.
Thank you,
Bye.
Doctor.
Thank you, Tigidin. Bye.
Okay.
Thank you, Prof.
Baru dapat. Okay, tangkap gambar siapa yang ada lah. Okay, bye. Take care. Rina, you are in the dark. Interesting, in fact. Okay, Safika, bye. I'm going to end, okay?
Okay, bye, Prof.
Bye.
Assalamualaikum.